And welcome back to What America's Thinking. We're discussing tight races in battleground states ahead of the midterm elections. So here's the big picture. Democrats are behind in the polls in Nevada, and they're hoping that this year's results mirror past big elections in the state where Democrats have trailed before Election Day, only to come out ahead when votes were actually counted. Rafael, you reported on this yesterday. Tell us more about what you learned.
Yeah, well, I learned looking at historical polling averages. I just used a Real Clear Politics polling average that basically takes everyone. That most big races, most close races in Nevada over the last 12 years, since Harry Reid famously did a comeback in 2010, Democrats are polling behind, and suddenly on the day of, they outperform polls. Harry Reid outperformed by 8 points. Jackie Rosen in 2018, the senator from Nevada, she outperformed by something like 4 or 5 points. And most polls just simply had it wrong. They weren't polling the right people.
Yeah, so it's interesting to look at Nevada because in a lot of these competitive Senate races, Georgia, Pennsylvania, for example, you have the Democratic candidate slightly ahead. And then we have that Cortez Masto, I believe, is the only incumbent Democratic senator who is polling behind her Republican challenger. I guess, why does this happen in Nevada? What makes Nevada so unique compared to a Pennsylvania or a Georgia?
Well, before anybody says, the polls are a thing of the past or they're all wrong, pollsters can only do so much, and different populations behave differently. So Nevada, people work really weird hours, for instance. Like in Las Vegas, people will work through the night and sleep during the day. That makes it harder for a pollster, a national pollster who doesn't have a base in Vegas, to poll those night workers. Nevada has a lot of Spanish speakers who, if they're polled in English, they're just not going to answer the poll. A lot of Latinos in Nevada, maybe they only have a mobile, maybe they only have a landline. They're hard to reach. However they are hard to reach, they have been hard to reach for a lot of pollsters. Oddly enough, in a lot of these cases, Emerson poll has gotten it right. They called it for, they had Rosen even, then Rosen did outperform the Emerson poll, but they've called a lot of Governor Steve Sisolak, who was running against Laxalt, who is now the Republican nominee against Senator Cortez Masto. Most polls had him underwater, and he's governor. So yeah. It's just generally, it seems to be a case of not being able to reach voters who do participate in the electoral process.
Right. And do you think that pollsters, it seems like Emerson is on the right track with this, but maybe other pollsters, would invest more into doing Spanish language polls, getting more people on the ground in Spanish speaking communities? And we talked before the show about how Harry Reid was very savvy in 2010, or maybe it was before then, where he decided to start campaigning in the middle of the night when a lot of these, I guess hospitality workers were going to work, or entertainment workers and such. Do you think pollsters will eventually hop on that bandwagon in Nevada? Because it seems like we know where the problem is, but we're still seeing polls all over the place.
Well, that's what Democrats are worried about, because as John Ralston of the Nevada Independent told me, 2010 was a long time ago. And Harry Reid, like I said, outperformed by eight points because he went to the Culinary Union. He went to the Latinos, asked, what do you guys want to participate in this election? And so he surprised Republicans by bringing out an electorate that before had not been participating, just reaching out and telling them why it would be important to have him in the Senate. Over the last 12 years, Republicans have caught wind of this, obviously, and a lot of pollsters have caught wind. There's a lot more nationally. You see a lot more English and Spanish polling, for instance. You see a lot more balance on how they try to reach voters. In Vegas, apparently Emerson has been catching the night shift very well historically. It's likely that other pollsters are doing a little bit of the same. But it's just really hard and really expensive, especially when you're polling at a distance. When you're polling from a call center on the East Coast, for instance, or out in LA, and you're trying to get into the sort of the rhythm of Vegas, Well, you know, anybody who's gone to Vegas knows that that city kind of plays by different rules.
Right, right. And we've talked about the Latino vote in the past on this show and talking about how there seems to be this national narrative pushed by Republicans that they are very much winning many segments of the Latino population. However, you wrote that this is a little different in Nevada.
Well, there's a lot more recent arrivals in Nevada. There's a lot more Spanish speakers in Nevada. There's a lot more recently naturalized people in Nevada. And it's a very sort of transient population. The Latinos who tend to go Republican are evangelicals. In Texas, for instance, are landowners, maybe small landowners, but landowners near the border who have concerns related to security over concerns related to treatment of immigrants at the border. That's not the case in Nevada. And you know, candidates like Laxalt have a pretty tough history. When he was Attorney General, he opposed DACA more than almost any Republican at the time. He was sort of the voice of DACA opposition, and that doesn't play well with Latinos who are immigration sensitive. Mm-hmm. It might not be the reason they're going out to vote, because you still have the economy. They are pushed by the economy, but Latinos who feel personally insulted by opposition to DACA, they're very unlikely to go out and vote for Laxalt. And again, there was a very powerful structure, this Reid machine. There has been a little bit of infighting among Nevada Democrats, but there's still coordination between Democrats and Hispanic organizations and these unions that will probably keep Nevada Latinos voting at least at the same rate as they did in 2018.
How is immigration playing in terms of campaign rhetoric this time around? Cortez Masto and Laxalt both have relatives that, you know, were immigrants to this country. Are we seeing that play out in their rhetoric on the trail?
Well, I'm sure Cortez Masto's team wants that to be discussed more. She's famously of Mexican and Italian descent, and she's very much embraced her Hispanic roots, especially, has said that, you know, as her daughter of immigrant experience, she didn't learn Spanish because it was a time period when when Hispanics were oppressed and Spanish was disencouraged by American society at large. So she has those regrets, and those translate well in her interactions with the community. Laxalt, well, he has a very complicated family history. As it turns out, his birth grandmother, who he never met, was briefly detained in the 1940s for being an undocumented Italian immigrant during the war. Laxalt's birth father, former Senator Pete Domenici of New Mexico, said that was why he supported immigrants so much, because he saw that happen to his own mother. That, because of many family reasons and personal and policy reasons, did not percolate down into Laxalt. So he's seen as somebody with very little sympathy for recent arrivals. He's very little sympathy for dreamers. And still, Republicans nationally are pursuing the Latino vote, and Laxalt is making the same economic arguments as other Republicans, and that will shave off a few voters who see that as their priority.
Yeah. And another, I guess, influence I'd like to talk about in Nevada is the Culinary Union, the union at large. I mean, over the past year in our political discourse nationally, we hear so much about teachers' unions, for example, and it seems like for some candidates, the teachers' union has been a bit of a liability, or Republicans have tried to make it a liability for them. But in Nevada, you got to get the Culinary Union to win.
Well, yeah, and funny you mentioned the teachers' union, because the teachers' union is not being part of that Reid machine as it was expected to be. But the Culinary Union, I mean, just think about Vegas. Tourism, the food industry, hospitality industry, it's everything. It's a heartbeat that state runs on. Sure, there is agriculture and ranching in the north. Sure, there are other cities that pull their weight, but really Nevada would be a much smaller state, like think Wyoming, were it not for the creation of the tourist mecca that Vegas is. And that tourist mecca is run by Latinos, and many of these Latinos are unionized, and the Culinary Union is the most powerful, but it's just an example of the motor that keeps that Reid machine running. But again, the question is, are they going to outperform polls again or not? I guess we're going to have to wait and see in November.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And finally, we talk about Las Vegas, we talk about Reno a little bit. What about the rural voters in Nevada? I mean, I believe that Harry Reid came from a relatively rural community. How are the candidates trying to reach them?
So Reid's story is very interesting because he was, in 1993, he delivered an anti-immigrant speech, a scathing anti-immigrant speech, which he later said he regretted. But in 2010, his conversion was very political. Like he ultimately supported immigration reform very aggressively in the Senate and sort of made peace with immigrants in this country. But he started off as sort of a prototypical Northern Nevadan. And at a time when Democrats were of two sides on immigration. And it's just very hard for the two sides of that state to talk to each other. And that's why we see such a division in the congressional districts. There are districts that are completely red and districts that are completely blue. And so long as there's not a shared interest between the rural, northern, ranching, open land communities and the hustle and bustle of the Strip, I'm afraid candidates are not going to be able to reach out holistically to all Nevadans. Yeah,
it's a real question that I think it's being asked not only in the race in Nevada, but really across the country. Yeah.
Well, Julia, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Good to see you.
Likewise. And thank you all for watching. And now we know a little bit more about what America's thinking, so we'll see you next time.